I believe last week we have touched a bit about Arab Bainal Diyana wa Tarikh. So the linking of religion and history. So the problem, as we have discussed before, is mainly number one is what we call the separation that has happened between religion and history, studying of religion and studying of history as two separate, as though they have no relation whatsoever. And furthermore, this is, of course, part of what we call the process of secularization, which has divested, right, history from its metaphysical or its religious, what do you call it? The religious ideas are divested from history. Everything is based on human agency. God has no part in the course of history. God has no influence whatsoever in the flow of events, and everything happens because of man and his hands, what he does, right? There's no spiritual significance to events that we see around us, right? So there is this emphasis on man instead of God as the actor, God as the one who has written the past, the present, and the future. So the focus becomes on social, economic, political factors purely, nothing to do with religion. And then we have this another issue, which is the fact that Muslims themselves, when they read history, they study it based on events, ahdath, not based on nusus, not based on Quran and Sunnah and the Athar. So they study, for example, events that happen in Islamic history, and they come to conclusions. They judge based on, their own opinion, without seeking recourse to what the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned about these events, right? The fitan, all the kinds of fitnah, right? And who are the people of hasanah that you should not blame, you should not make remarks that are not appropriate for their, according for their rank lah. They have a particular rank with Allah, and then you make remarks that are not layak lah, not really suited to them, who they are. So these are the two main problems. So we talk about linking history to religion, right? So he says, I think we have gone through a bit of the first part. If you look at the Quran itself, it is 2/3 of it, you can say, is about history. It's about past nations, right? It's about the creation of Adam alayhi salam. And so you have repeated in the Quran the takwin of Adam, the creation of Nabi Adam alayhi salam, and how, the story between him and Iblis, right? How it pans out, and the subsequent enmity of Iblis towards the Bani Adam and his promise until the end of times to misguide, right? To misguide the son of Adam. So it stretches from the time of Adam until the end of time. So وَمَا يَخُصُّهُ مِنَ الْآيَاتِ وَالْأَحَادِيثِ وَمَوْقِفِ إِبْلِيسِ مِنَ السُّجُودِ لِآدَمْ وَمَا تَرَتَّبَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ. So whatever that follows from that, Iblis's refusal to sujud to Nabi Adam, and whatever follows after that, that means he's getting kicked out of Jannah, and he being his promise to misguide the children of Adam. And then we study the marhala, the next phase, right, of staying in Jannah, in which Adam alayhi salam, after consuming from the forbidden tree, he was given the burden of taklif, right, and was sent down to the earth, right, and his children are given that to carry this taklif of right, that which the mountains and the other creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not take upon themselves. And then the study of the face after that. So these are phases that he divides, right, during the early time. So because if you look at all, there's this particular narration, right? Amr bin Akhtab, he says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Salla bina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam al-Fajr. The Prophet prayed Fajr with the companions, and then what happens after that? Wasa'id al-mimbar. He climbed up the mimbar, فَخَطَبَنَا, and he gave us a khutbah. After that, فَحَضَرَتْ ثُمَّ حَضَرَتْ الظُّهْرُ. After that, datang waktu zuhur. Zuhur came, فَنَزَلَ, he came down, فَصَلَّى, he prayed. After the Prophet prayed, ثُمَّ صَعِدَ الْمِمْبَرِ, he went up the mimbar again, and he gave a khutbah again, until Asr. فَحَضَرَتِ الْعَصْرِ ثُمَّ نَزَلَ فَصَلَّى, he went down again and prayed again. And then after praying, فَصَعِدَ الْمِمْبَرِ, he went up the mimbar again, فَخَطَبَنَا, he gave a khutbah again, and after that, until the sun set. So this narration, which is in Sahih Muslim, right, it tells us that the Prophet ﷺ spent an entire day giving khutbah. So what was the khutbah about? So the Amr bin Akhtab said, the khutbah, Rasulullah ﷺ mentioned, فَأَخْبَرَنَا بِمَا كَانَ وَمَا هُوَ كَائِنٌ. The Prophet told us what has happened and what will happen. فَأَعْلَمُنَا أَحْفَظُنَا. The one who has most knowledge of these things amongst us are the ones who memorize the most. So this is one of the narrations. There's another one, right, which I mentioned last week. So this narration tells us that the Prophet ﷺ, he spent the entire day just to talk about history, the past, the present, and past and the future, right? مَا كَانَ وَمَا هُوَ كَائِنٌ. What will happen and what has happened. So the time of what has happened is that from the, you can say from the era, from this marhala, right, of Adam alayhi salam all the way, right, of all the major events. And then you have narrations like the Prophet ﷺ mentioned about every fitnah, suni'at li fitnati dajjal. Ma min fitnatin munzu ahdi Adam. There is not a single fitnah since the time of Nabi Adam alayhi salam, illa suni'at. It is like setting the stage for the fitnah of Dajjal. So there is this kind of interconnection. There is this kind of link between all of this fitnah and the fitnah of Dajjal. Right? So all these events, all these are interlinked in what we call the linking of history to religion. And then this is a dirasa bad'i marhalati mas'uliyat khilafah. The beginning, the study of the beginning of the marhala of the responsibilities of the khilafah. Meaning to say, the khilafah in its general sense, in the term of in mankind being the khilafah, being the khalifah fil ard. According to the sifat of the madrasah abawiyah, nabawiyah, and of Adam, and whoever who follows his way, whoever believes in him, and the egotistic madrasah of shaitan, and whoever follows his way. Right? So it begins, right, with that separation of, for example, the story of Qabil and Habil, right, the two brothers. how Qabil follows the latter path, and Habil follows the former path. Right? Is like a symbolism or symbolic of these two schools. وما ترتب على افتراق المدرستين. Whatever follows from this separation of these two schools, right? And it is still ongoing, right? From in all the examples from the time of Habil and Qabil all the way to all the prophets. Nuh alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Musa, and so on and so forth. Right? So he further categorizes, right, the phases of human existence, not just now was what we talk about after Nabi Adam alayhi salam. Nabi Adam alayhi salam and whatever follows after that. But if you were to look at the whole human existence, it is much wider than that, right? We have ilmu sawabiq wal azal. Qabla wujudil insan. Whatever that precedes the creation of man falls under this in azal. So this is also part of our Islamic so-called history. Right? It ties up history with theology. It does not separate God, his knowledge of creation, from history. Ilmu ajal wal amal. Ilmu ajal wal yakhtassu bi ulumil hayati dunya min at-taklifat wal ibtila'at al-mutaghayyirat. So this ilmu ajal and wal amal serves to discuss about the knowledge of our life in this world, human existence in this world. And then this part itself can be separated into many, many phases, right? Many marahil, many marhala, which later we can see, right? Marhala risalah, marhala qira'ah istibaqiyah, marhala qira'ah istiqra'iyah. Right? So this, you can go, these three separate categories. And then ilmu amad, wa yakhtassu bi'alam al-ajdath wal-amwat wal-ard ala rabbil bariyat. So this is post or after death, right? From the barzakh onwards. And the qiyamah. Wa yakhtassu bi'alam. Number 4 is whatever that comes after that, post qiyamah, like the eternal bliss or eternal damnation. Jannah wa nar wa namadhij ma fiha min an-na'im wal azab wa ghayri zalik. So all of this, right, from pre-eternity to eternity, this whole everything is, you know, is a subject, is a history, is part of this human narrative. ويؤنى هذا العلم بتصحيح مفهوم قراءة التاريخ كله. So it concerns itself with reading the history, the entirety of it, beginning from the Rasah Azaliyah or Sawabiq, right, and so on and so forth. And as what we mentioned before, Imam Al-Haddad has already discussed something about this, right, in his book, right, the lives of men. So quickly jump to this. This whole chapter is devoted to the dirasah or the rabtu baina diyana wa tarikh. So as we mentioned before, the Quran itself concerns itself, has a huge portion, about 2/3 of it, discussing about history, right? And it is read in a way that it highlights to us what should be our focus when we study history. So if you look at the Western civilization, if you look at the secular view of Fir'aun, for example, Fir'aun, in the secular perspective, or from the perspective of the materialist non-Muslim perspective, it is a civilization that they admire, that for them it is an apex of civilization, a peak, a combination of art and culture and engineering and in the past, right? They admire Fir'aun and his works. Right? But how does the Quran address this? How does the Quran talks about Fir'aun, right, and his buildings, right? is a different approach, is a different view, right? What is central? I mean, what does Quran um, focus on? It focus on the disbelief of Fir'aun, the stubbornness of Fir'aun, his rejection of God. So the Quran has a different metaphysical approach to history. So that's how, you know, we know that historians, they tend to focus on things that are what they believe in, right? If you have like a feminist historian, she will focus on the aspects of women and their life and their, you know, how they are treated in that kind of culture, and their bias will lead them to interpret things in a different way. So different historians with different backgrounds, different worldview, different akidah, right? Different inclinations, they will have different approach, different ways of interpretation. And so when we want to study the history, the past, present, and future, we take the Quran, the nusus, as our guideline. So we don't fall into that, you know, confusion that many Muslims are falling into when they look at the past, ending up, you know, they glorify, they celebrate pharaonic things. They have like, I think like some celebration of ancient Egypt in Egypt, right? Where they have like some perarakan, they have like some march or some where they, you know, they carry all these effigies, all these coffins of Fir'aun, and, you know, they celebrate it. So we know what kind of civilization this Fir'aun was. He was Iblisi. He was following the path of Iblis. Madrasah Anawiyah, right? Ana Rabbukumul A'la. He called himself a god. So similarly, when we look at the Islamic civilization, we don't over glorify the phase of Mulkul Adud as the golden age of Islamic history. We don't see it as the golden age. The golden age is the time of Rasulullah, right? That was the peak, right? It wasn't during the time of the Abbasids, even though we do acknowledge their contribution to the world, but they are not considered the most morally, the golden age in terms of moral and ethics and spirituality. And so this is the reason why this linking of history to religion is important, right? So I think just excuse me for a few minutes. I need to go to the toilet. Yeah. Sorry for that. So we resume. So it says صار من مهمات الفقه التحولات ربط ديانة بالتاريخ ربطا وثيقا غير منقسم ولا منفصل فالقارئون للتاريخ على صفة الأحداث. So the focus or the one of the focus of fiqh tahawulat is to link religion with history with religion in a very firm or in a manner that cannot be broken, right, or separated. So a person who reads history from the way of, you know, events, from merely looking at events, right? So he will end up, right, reading history and interpreting it according to the people who feed him this history, people who those people who sunnah meaning like someone who creates this narrative, those who create the narrative. right? Those who are the policy makers, the people who are in power. So they are the ones who interpret it. And if you read that, if you read their, version of history, you get this manner, you get this result, you get this way of understanding history. بل يختلفون ويتنابزون بالألقاب. They end up, having all this ikhtilaf and throwing of labeling of each other, right? So it results in a kind of sectarianism, right? Stopping at the explanation of events, right? And the flow of events, right? And alliances, right? So you have, for example, the best example we have is like Sayyidina Usman, radiallahu anhu. What happened during his time, right? People come out with all kinds of speculation. They talk about, who is right, who is wrong, right? And if they were to go back to the nusus, go back to the text of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam talk about? What did he mention to Sayyidina Uthman? Inna Allah yuqammisuka. Allah will wear for you a garment. And the munafiqs, they will try to remove it from you. Do not remove it. So this garment or this qamis that Allah is, gonna put on Sayyidina Uthman, according to the Prophet, is his caliphate, right? And the people who try to remove him from the caliphate, the Prophet used the term hypocrites to describe them. So if you read the nusus, the nas, right, related to all of this Sayyidina Uthman and his caliphate, you will come to the conclusion, you will understand, you will not fall into error regarding his stances, regarding him, right? Unlike the other people, those who just, follow or read history books written by Orientalists, by Westerners, by even some Muslims also fall into this error because they do not go back to what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned about Sayyidina Uthman. So that is one example. So it says, وَالْحَقِيقَةُ الْمُغَيَّبَةُ عَنِ الْجَمِيعِ. So this reality which is absent, which is many people have, are oblivious of, is that أن الديانة الشرعية ممثلة بالقرآن والسنة قد فرغت منذ عهد الصدر الأول من تصنيف التاريخ الإنساني. The Quran and the Sunnah has finished talking about history. The history, right, is found in the Quran and the Sunnah, and it has completed basically. If you understand the fact that Allah SWT has written the past, the present, and the future, right, everything is in the knowledge of God, and He has informed His Prophet, right, what will happen, بما كان وما هو كائن, right, قديما وحديثا وحاضرا ومستقبلا, وبينت كل ما يتعلق في مسيرته بين الخير والشر. It has, the Quran and Sunnah has, clarified, right, whatever these two paths of evil and good, truth and falsehood. حتى صار توثيق القرآن والحديث نبوي أعظم شاهد. So this documentation of the Quran and Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is the greatest proof or the greatest witness upon history and interpreter of history and its realities. Al-Ijabiyah wa mudinin li abatilihi asalbiyah. It has taken, right, to task, right, all the falsehood. إلا أن هذا التوثيق لا يرتبط بما تدرسه الأمة المؤثرة من ثمرات العلم الأصول واستدلال السنة الثلاثة قولية وفعلية تقريرية وأن فيها من العلم. So this history is not, where is it in our tradition? It falls under the Rukun al-Rabi'. Basically, that's it. What he's trying to say, that it does not fall under Islam, Iman and Ihsan, although it has some connection to it, right? But it falls into the fourth Rukun, right? Ilmu mutaghayyirat, tahawulat. والصحيح الذي لا غبار عليه. The truth or the correct, what is correct, that has no doubt on it, is that أن المتغيرات هو علم التاريخ والتحولات. These changes is the knowledge of history and tahawulat, and it is a part that cannot be separated from religion. وبالدمج بين ثمراتها, and by integrating its fruits, whatever that comes forth from reading, studying it. والقراءة الواعية لهما تبرز حقائق المغيبة. So there is this hadith the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Quran فيه علم الأولين والآخرين. Then there is the knowledge of the people of the earliest people and the later people, right? من أراد خير الأولين والآخرين فليثور القرآن, right? So there's two narrations. One say خير الأولين والآخرين, the narration say علم الأولين والآخرين. So ومن أراد علم الأولين والآخرين فليثور القرآن. ثور meaning literally is like to raise something up, right? To research the Quran, to study, to rombak, to go into detail, discussing its, whatever that's the verses and its meanings. والقارئ للتاريخ مرتبطا بالديانة تلزمه العودة الواعية للقرآن الكريم. Right, so the person who wants to study history linked to religion, he must return to a conscious or like a very attentive study of the Quran, right? كي يستخلص منه أسس هذا العلم, so that he can extract from it the very foundations, right, of this knowledge. Then he has to go to the Sunnah. ثم العودة إلى السنة الشريفة لاستكمال نسيج القراءة الواعية فيما يخص التاريخ وتحولاته. So after the Quran, go to the Sunnah to get further details. ولا يمكن بحال من الأحوال أن يتعرف المرء على هذا الأمر إلا بدراسة فقه التحولات, دراسة واعية. So he adds that, and this is not enough, you must also have the science of tahawulat, the understanding of tahawulat, the principles of tahawulat, the framework of tahawulat. لأنه علم المختص بهذا النوع من الحياة, because it is the science or the knowledge that is concerned with this particular type, هذا النوع من الحياة, this part of the life in this world. وقولنا العودة إلى القرآن الكريم والسنة النبوية لا لاستخلاص مقاييس هذا العلم. When we say the returning to the Quran and Sunnah to extract this maqayis like how you measure things, right? According to this knowledge, right? The maqayis, the scales of this knowledge. معناه النظر في وظائف النص القرآني ومحتواه. What does it mean? It means to look into, reflect upon all the various functions, right, or of the text of the Quran and whatever it contains and pertains, and to look into the nas of the hadith al-khas bihadha al-ajanib wa tafsilatihi. As I mentioned last week, right, we study the books of tahawulat first, right, the principles, and then the applications. Applications books like what? Books like those books like al-Talib wa Tarif, for example. I consider it as a tatbiq, as an application, because it lays out events in a chronological way. Or even al-Barzanji, for example, the Science of the Hour by Imam al-Barzanji. And then you get a better picture of what's happening. And then you can go on to what we are talking about here, the Quran and the Sunnah, as the ultimate, and it's all the what do you call it, the tafsir of the Quran and the tafsir of the hadith, or the sharah of the hadith. And I tend to like to read more contemporary ones, which has gathered in it past, what do you call it, past commentaries, and also commentaries from a more modern perspective, in the sense that they have a, they have seen more of the Ashratu Sa'ah and how it manifests, right? فالقرآن لا يروي أحداث تاريخ كوقائع سياسية. The Quran does not narrate these events of history like political events, right? As mentioned earlier, right, the Quran does not narrate about Fir'aun and Musa's, the tension or the encounter between Nabi Musa and Fir'aun as something merely political, but it looks into the moral, spiritual aspects of it. Or ijtima'iyatan mustaqillatan, or it does not look at these events based on the sociological independent perspective. بل يرويها ويروي معها موقف أصحابها. So mawqif, it looks at the mawqif of the people. What was the mawqif of Nabi Musa? What was the mawqif of Fir'aun? Right? With regards to religion, with regards to God, with regards to prophethood. ويروي موقف الديانة الشرعية من المرحلة وأربابها. And it narrates the mawqif. What does the religion, what does God say about, these things, right? These events. بل إننا كلما استطردنا في قراءة القرآن من أوله إلى أوسطه إلى آخره سنجد العجب والإعجاب في القراءة التاريخية المرتبطة بالديانة سلبا وإيجابا. So whenever we, right, bring, every time we read the Quran from beginning to the end, to its middle to its end, we will find amazing matters when it comes to talk about or regarding historical reading, right? That is tied to religion, whether it is something good or something bad. بل يزداد الأمر عجبا عند النظر في نتائج سلبية وما تؤدي إليه من هلاك ونتائج الإيجابية وما تؤدي إليه من سلامة والاستقرار. So again, when you look at what English books do you recommend to read on history? What English history books do you recommend to read? And as for Arabic, what titles? Okay, history is different. Tahawulat is different. But it's okay to read history, no issue. As long as you know, once you have this, idea about tahawulat, about, the principles of tahawulat, it will guide you when you read history. You will not fall into error. You will not fall into, zam, what we call azam. Azam meaning accuse, saying bad things about people in the past who have a particular standing, particular rank, particular, kita jaga lidah kita, guard our tongues from saying things that are not appropriate towards these people when we read events in history. So if you don't read tahawulat, you will fall into that. So if you want to read, you start with tahawulat first, then you start with like al-Barzanji. Imam al-Barzanji, his book, I think, is translated partially. And then there are other works also. I think in the past, I think I've recommended a few. I can't remember now. You can also read, no problem if you want to read. There's, I think, English translation of Tarikh Tabari. Is translated also, but it's a lot. It's too big. It's voluminous, like probably many volumes. So what I recommend is to read the al-Barzanji and the likes of him, right? Those that deal with tahawulat first. Then we look into because they will often cite the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ regarding the fitnas. A lot of this fitan occurred after the time of the Prophet ﷺ between the companions. So, well, We'll go back to the text. So that again, he emphasized, right, how the Quran, when you read it, yazdadul amru ajaban in the nazar fi nata'ij as-salbiyah. Right? We look at what, the evil results, right, that happen to the people, right, who oppose the messengers, for example. وَمَا تُؤَدِّي إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَلَاكٍ. And the good results. So it always guides you and shows you the consequence. And the Quran is not just narration of history, it narrates the consequence of what happened, not just in this world, but in the next world. Right? Salamah fi dunya, minas salama wal istiqrar. Keselamatan di dunia, stability di dunia dan akhirat. So, yeah, that is how the Quran, its approach towards history is. وقد ضربنا في كتاب الأسوس المنطلقات على هذا الشأن مثلا حيا. So he goes on to talk about Surah Al-Kahf, right? In Usus al-Muntalaqat, his major book, right, he talks about Surah Al-Kahf. So Surah Al-Kahf is significant in fiqh tahawulat. As we all know, we are encouraged to recite it, number one. Number two, Surah Al-Kahf come in the context of a question answered by Rasulullah SAW. Allah answers the question through the Prophet, and a question that is given by a Jewish person, right, to Quraysh, two members of the Quraysh went to the Jew to ask about this prophet and how to investigate the prophet's identity and truthfulness. And he asked them to ask the prophet three questions. So two of the questions pertain to history. Two of the questions pertains to history, meaning to say it talks about the past, namely the youth of Surah Al-Kahf, right? The youth who went to the cave. So the word kahf, cave itself also has a significance today, right? We look at how today safety lies in running to your cave, hiding in your cave, right? The khuwaisa is concerning yourself with your own self, right? Your own. So khuwaisa has several meanings, right? One of it is death, right? So if you're concerned with your own death, means you're concerned with minding your own business lah, right? And then those closest to you. So this kahf has that idea of withdrawing, right, from society in the times of fitnah, in the times of corruption. So furthermore, if you look at the second question, right, it's a question about history as well. The Zulkarnain, right, how he went from the east to the west. But the third question about the ruh is not mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf. Surah Al-Kahf does not concern itself about, Surah Al-Kahf is mostly about history, the past. But interestingly, if you read everything about Surah Al-Kahf, it's relevant today, right? The fitna of wealth, right? So if you look at the last questions, or the question was about ruh. Ruh is something metaphysical. It's metaphysics. It's beyond the material world. It's talking about something that is nothing related to history. Not really related to history, but the nature of the soul is metaphysics. So it is not put in Surah Al-Kahf. It is revealed and it is placed in Surah Al-Isra. So yeah, these are some points or some interesting facts about Surah Al-Kahf. So I think it's enough for today. It's quite a long session already. I hope you are still with me. And do you have any other questions besides what was asked by our brother a while ago about history? So it's important for us to understand this difference between history, right, and tahawulat. Tahawulat contains history, but it's more than that, right? It's a study of history that leads us to particular objective of staying safe in times of trials and tribulation. Okay, so I assume there's no questions. Barakallahu fikum. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Syukran Ustaz.
Okay.